Mr. Speaker, if the government actually let me vote in UK elections, I would vote for the government, because the government is able to create jobs for all of the unemployed people in the UK just by saying the word multiplier. But there's one problem with the government in this debate, Mr. Speaker, and that's that they haven't been able to explain why unemployment exists across the entirety of the UK right now, and why them saying the word multiplier hasn't solved that problem, and that's why this motion fails. I want to talk about the three issues in this debate. First, I'm going to talk about the city. That's the rosy picture they painted. Second, I'm going to talk about the town. That's all the irrational dog lodgers who are left. And the third I'm going to talk about is the principles of welfare, which is their ivory tower utilitarianism point. Let's move to the first issue, the city, and the rosy picture they paint. Where this debate lives or dies for the government, Mr. Speaker, is whether they can get people into jobs or not. Now, what we've heard from them is two things. One, multiplier. Two, training is somehow going to be more effective when it's at the source. But the problem is, Mr. Speaker, these jobs don't exist. Like, if there's some multiplier effect, like if there's some steel mill who really wants workers right now, we have two responses to that. One, people in those communities would take those jobs. Two, the incentive already exists for people in these communities that are dependent on welfare in Northern Wales and Northern England, like to send their CV via email, maybe to have an interview by Skype, maybe to get a bus, get that job, and then move down there. So we don't buy the fact that these primary jobs in factories and the like are there in the first place. And so then, well, are there these towns where there are all these steel mills, and there's nobody to service them, there are no restaurants, there are no schools, there are no hospitals? No, they don't exist for exactly the same reason, because people would have taken those jobs under the status quo. No, thank you. Like, just saying an Econ 1101 word, like multiplier, doesn't get you anywhere in this debate. Doing this argument, like, training's better at the source than where it happens under the status quo. Well, you never really told us why that's true. Like, that just is an argument for having better training programs in these communities, training them up, getting them a job, and then giving people the incentive to move there. So, no, thank you. Then let's talk about the second thing under this. Where will they live in these towns? Well, like, what we heard from opening government is they're going to be exposed to prosperous areas. We don't think they're going to be able to afford nice flats in Notting Hill in London on their welfare benefits. In fact, we think their welfare benefits go even less of the way than they do in these poor towns where cost of living is lower. That means they're going to be pushed onto the fringes of these communities. We think they're going to live in pretty bad circumstances there, and we think they're not going to be able to get a job. What's the extra problem with this under their model? They have no money to go back to the town where their families and friends live, and so they're stuck in these communities without a job, without family, and without friends. That's even worse than the position under the status quo. Then the government wanted to talk so much about this great amenities argument. There's better schools in London, there's better hospitals in London. Okay, fine, like fix the hospitals and schools in these communities. That's a really easy answer. But moreover, if people care so much about these schools and these hospitals, they can move to London right now. We're not stopping them. So, the next thing that I want to talk about at this point is the resentment. Because unemployment exists across the country right now, something they're still not prepared to acknowledge on the government bench. We think that the people who are unemployed in London and like whatever other towns you want to talk about are going to be very resentful when unemployed people from outside their towns come in, no thank you, and take the jobs that they're competing for. The final thing I want to talk about under this point is, can you form a community in London, like if you're not from London? Yes, obviously you can. Expat communities do it all the time. Is it the same as the community you came from? Absolutely not. And if you're a passionate Welsh person, no thank you, who wants to see street signs in Wales, who wants to talk to people on a daily basis who are Welsh, in everything they do, we think that's a completely legitimate choice for them. Because like when you say, oh, can you form an expat community of London? Of course you can. You've made that choice that you're prepared to live in London and that you're prepared to take the second best, which is the expat community that's there, rather than in your hometown. We don't think that you should be forcing that choice on these people. So then, let's move to the second issue, the town. Is it a legitimate choice to stay? Well, yes, Max gave you some pretty key analysis here. He told you people stay because they have sick family members. People stay because they're old. They're like 55 and they're on a welfare benefit and they're just waiting out their days to get a pension and there's no chance of them getting a job. And so they're just going to say, no, I'm going to stay. They might have kids in school. They might care about their culture like people in Wales. We don't think it's like fair of you to force people in Wales to move to England and abandon everything they know. No, thank you. And one key thing that the government continues not to acknowledge in this debate, Mr. Speaker, is that the incentives exist under the status quo. Like, people can apply for jobs right now. They can get those jobs, and then they can move. What you're doing is coercing people who have already made that rational choice. That they care about things like their culture, like their family, like what they know, and the fact that they're weighing into account whether or not they would actually be able to get a job if they move. So then we hear this argument, oh, well, we'll reinvest in these communities, like, once these people have started moving. It's going to be easier because they won't have this stigma of welfare bludgers. We'll be able to invest there. Here's the problem with that, Mr. Speaker. Even if you're on unemployment benefits, this is where the multiplier analysis comes in, because people on welfare benefits have kids in school, they use hospitals, they catch public transport and they eat in restaurants and buy food from Sainsbury's. When you move these people out of those towns, you also take the jobs of people who are working right now. Because when you take their kids out of school, suddenly you have to lay off the teachers, suddenly you have to lay off the doctors and the public transport workers. So there will be nobody left under their model to invest in. And we think that's a fundamental problem that they haven't dealt with in this debate. I'll say no thing.
Even if they can't get jobs in the city, which we think they will, it's a comparative between living in the middle of nowhere in a toxic environment and being on welfare, or living on welfare in a city in a prosperous area.
I think those people should be allowed to make that decision for themselves rather than you telling them. I think that people can make that calculus, that if the most important thing for them is getting a job, we think that they can do that under the status quo, like I've told you, by sending in their CV, by taking an interview on Skype. So let's talk about the third issue in this debate, the principles of welfare. Well, Max gave you some really gold analysis on this. We didn't think it was adequately responded to by government. We can see there's no absolute right to welfare. That wasn't a killer point at closing government. But Max gave you really good analysis about when we take away your right to welfare. And we say that it's basically never, right? Like it's only in the most serious of circumstances. What we do instead is we try and condition welfare. We try and say things like you need to be looking for a job in order to get welfare. And it's normally things when it's based on individual behaviours, where you say, I can't be bothered looking for a job. Or when in Indigenous communities in Australia you don't send your children to school, then we decide that we're going to condition it in this way. There's absolutely no precedent that anyone on the government bench has been able to point to in this debate where we do something as drastic as taking away somebody's welfare because they won't move across the country in the hope of finding a job somewhere else. And that's a really big problem for them in this debate. So, Mr. Speaker, because we don't think the future is brighter for the people who move, because we think you're actually detrimentally hurting the people who are in jobs in these towns under the status quo, and because we don't think you've engaged properly with the welfare analysis in this debate, we're very proud to oppose.